Okay, so let's see. So right now on your screen, you should see me. You should also see Claudia, who I'll introduce in a minute, and Shelly. Um, you are joining us today for a really exciting webinar, as exciting, I guess, as divorce webinars get. And that's because I have this saying, I always say, like, our client services team is like always a bridesmaid, never a bride. Maybe might be too soon for those kind of jokes, but I mean it in that they are the heart and the backbone of Hello Divorce. They are the people who are really helping all of you walk through the divorce process and get there as conveniently, affordably, easily as possible, and yet they're rarely on screen. So I was able to wrangle up two of my absolute favorites, Claudia and Shelly, and you'll hear from them today, and you'll also learn about them in just a minute. But I want to start by welcoming you. I know it's hard to make time to attend these things, and I really appreciate you being here. I can only imagine how busy and full your life is. And when you're contemplating divorce or you're in the process of divorce, there's even more happening. So even in my life, just this morning, I dropped my youngest daughter off at school and she looked at me and said, "OMG, mom, like you're wearing your red slippers again." And I looked down and I'm like in the middle of the school hallway and I've got these red, furry, obnoxious slippers on. And that was how I started my day. So I'm sure some of you can relate. And because of that, I'm just really excited that you're here. And I'm hoping that you can get a lot out of this webinar. What I ordinarily start with is some of our goals, because I think it's helpful to know what you can expect to receive from this webinar. So as I mentioned a minute ago, you're going to meet a couple members of our team. We are also going to talk through pretty quickly your options for divorce. And the reason why it's quick is because some of you have attended other webinars in which we really went into this in full detail, but I still want to share a little bit there. And then I want to talk through timelines, steps, procedures, and I'm going to do two caveats because I am a lawyer. One is that the divorce process varies from state to state and sometimes county to county. So a lot of what we're telling you is going to be very general in nature. If you have a specific question about your state that we don't get to, we can certainly answer offline or through one of our resources. But the general issues, the general process applies across all states. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. Caveat number one. Caveat number two is that this is not legal advice. Legal advice is when I am specifically applying the law to the facts of your case and providing you advice on what to do or what your options are. Instead, we're going to give you information about the law and the process. And I think that will be helpful. And then finally, we're going to leave the biggest part of today open for questions and answers with our team. And many of you have sent a bunch of them ahead of time, and I really appreciate that. But as I said before, you can throw them to me in chat, and I'm happy to take a look. And then finally, we'll be giving a promo code, both announcing it in this webinar, but also emailing it to you for $100 off any product or service that you choose should you decide to do your divorce with us. Finally, I want to let you know that you will see in the chat section that Katie Reesberg is here. Katie is from our team and she is our head of content. She is wonderful. As we are talking, she might pop certain links into the chat that reference what we're discussing or give you a little bit more detail. So if that interests you at all, pay attention to chat. Otherwise, completely ignore it. And we will send you the links along with this deck and the recording of this webinar later today. Okay. So getting started, briefly about me, you know I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing law for 16 years, first through a law firm that I have in the San Francisco Bay Area in Oakland. And then later I transitioned into founding Hello Divorce. And our goal with Hello Divorce is to make the divorce process a lot easier, more affordable, and convenient, and in some cases friendlier, because there's always going to be conflict. I understand that. I've been doing this long enough to know, but I also know that there's a different way, and that if our first instinct is to go and lawyer up with the most aggressive lawyer in town, that leads to a really expensive divorce. In fact, on average, $20,000 per person in this country. So I knew there was a different way. I brought in some of the smartest folks in the industry and beyond, and we launched Hello Divorce in 2018. And here we are today. So Shelly has been a paralegal for 15 years, and I am so lucky because of those 15 years, I think the two of us have had the opportunity to work together every single one of those years. Early in her career, she was primarily focused on litigation. So when I went to trial, or when we had really, really complex, messy divorces that were already caught in the court system, Shelly and I would work hand in hand to prepare for those cases. More recently, she has transitioned to Hello Divorce. For the last few years, she's been working directly with Hello Divorce customers. And now she is a director of our account management team. Her goal is to ensure that clients receive the utmost care and attention throughout their divorce. So that is what she's focused on, which you don't normally hear from a legal services company or a law office. And that's what makes me so proud to have Shelly on this team. We also have Claudia Brown. Claudia is a teacher. She is an extraordinary mediator. She is our fan favorite. Customers love her. She is not a lawyer, which is actually her superpower. What I tend to see with a lot of lawyer mediators is that their focus is squarely on the law. What's your best and what's your worst case scenario, and then sort of working from there. And unfortunately, the laws apply to a very small segment of the population. For most people, the default laws don't necessarily make sense. And so what Claudia does is she works with spouses, sometimes together, sometimes alone, to not only work through conflict, but to come to some really creative solutions that work for the parties, and in some cases actually shift the narrative going forward from anger and resentment to a more productive co-parenting relationship as they reorganize their family. So welcome, Claudia. Something I just want you to remember throughout this entire webinar is that most of divorce is not immediate, meaning unless there is a wildly big emergency, like your spouse has taken your kids and you can't get them back, or you've been cut off from finances. Unless there's an emergency like that, most of divorce is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. You will have plenty of time to think through what you ultimately agree to, and to have somebody on our team, maybe one of our lawyers, our mediators, review that final agreement before the two of you sign off. So just keep that in mind, that this is a lot of information. You don't need to understand it all right now, retain it all. You will have time. And while I know you're probably anxious to move through this as quickly as possible, you also don't want it to take over your life. And so that's why it's so important to sort of take it in steps. So the divorce overview that I promised you, and really what I would strongly suggest is that you click to download Divorce 101. If you haven't given if you don't have a membership, that's okay. You don't need to have a membership to access it, but the Divorce 101 download is really going to give you insight into all the different areas that you need to prepare for during divorce and support you throughout the journey. But in overall sort of general explanation of what divorce looks like, you will have some timelines, meaning the divorce itself doesn't actually start until some initial documents are filed. In some states, like Colorado, you can file jointly with your spouse. In most states, one of you has to file. It doesn't mean that it's the spouse who wanted a divorce. What it usually means is it's the spouse who's better with paperwork and keeping track of things. In some states, you have waiting periods. So as an example, in California, it's 6 months. In Colorado, it's 90 days. But in some states, once you file that petition, you actually have to deliver it to your spouse before this waiting period begins. And you can't be divorced. Even if you finish your entire agreement and all your paperwork, you actually won't be divorced until that waiting period is over. So something to be cognizant of. Do you have a waiting period in your state? And if so, how long? The second thing you'll absolutely have to do, and sometimes formally through documents that you have to prove you've done, and sometimes informally, is financial disclosures. You have to get everything on the table. For a lot of people, that feels like high anxiety. It feels like, okay, if I disclose that I have this house that my mom gave me, does that mean I have to give it to my spouse or share it with my spouse? The answer is no, not usually. If you have separate property, that's yours. But I guess my point here is that just because you disclose it doesn't mean that it's subject to division, or doesn't mean that things are going to get messy. What it does mean is that if things get kind of messy, or if your spouse feels like they don't have enough information, you're going to be able to prove that you're acting in good faith. And if you don't disclose this stuff, it could come back to bite you much later on. There are rules in virtually every state that if you fail to disclose assets and your spouse finds them, they can not only come back later and request some of that, but they can, in a lot of cases, request all of that asset and maybe even lawyer fees. So we want to avoid that. We want to do financial disclosures correctly. If you work with us, we will ensure that that gets taken care of. And then the final step in every state is going to be getting to an agreement, which is probably the trickiest step, right? For a lot of us. There's many ways to do it. First of all, we have a checklist with all the settlement agreement terms you want to think of. We have software to help walk you through each of the terms you need to agree on. We have excellent mediators like Claudia who are standing by to help you and your spouse resolve conflict. And then we also have lawyers to help you negotiate or give you advice when you get to this step. So quickly, our options if you want to get a divorce, your approach to divorce. So it used to be either you do it on your own or you lawyer up and you pay a hefty retainer and you hope that lasts you as long as like reasonably possible. Nowadays, there's more options. The first, of course, is do it yourself. You can go to the court and the website and download the forms there. You can use our DIY software, which walks you through the steps to get divorced and the forms. What's most popular at our company is our DIY Pro plan. And what that is you use our software to prepare the forms and work through the steps. But Shelly's team then jumps in to help with everything from navigating the complicated submission filings to filing the documents with the court, to coordinating service or delivery of those forms with your spouse, and provide you resources as you might need them. And then there's also the option to do mediation, where a mediator will jump in and help resolve conflict. And work with our account coordinators who are helping you along with the procedural stuff. So the procedural stuff, forms, filing, service, substance, coming to an agreement. Then there's always the option to lawyer up, which we have loads of webinars and resources on when that might be appropriate. If you really need a lawyer or if you just want to speak to one for an hour or two. So definitely check those out on our site. Yeah, so those are the general options. I'm going to move because I'm a little bit behind time. I might come back to discussing a little bit about the Hello Divorce, but instead, right now, I'm going to move forward to the questions and answers. And I'm just checking to see. Okay, great. So Katie's dropping those links in chat. That should be really helpful. And I do have somebody stated in the Q&A, certified divorce financial planner. So I'm just going to answer that real quickly because it was on the last slide and I accidentally forgot. So a certified divorce financial planner, often called a certified divorce financial analyst or certified divorce planner, is somebody who can help you and or your spouse. So they can either be your advocate or they can work with both of you as a neutral to resolve and sort of understand some of the financial issues that might come up for you. So one example might be to run through various child or spousal support scenarios to see, what works best, maximizes the money in each of your pockets and lessens your, tax requirements, that kind of thing. Another way they help is to value retirement interests, stock options. If there is a property that's partly joint and partly separate, certified divorce financial analyst can help with that. In the moment, we have an amazing certified divorce financial analyst that works with our California clients. However, we are quickly expanding that portion of the business. So if you are in another state and want a CDFA, then let us know. And if we have someone, then we will hook you up with them. And if we don't, we likely have a referral that we can send you. Okay, on to the questions. Claudia, Shelley, are you ready? Okay, so unmute yourself. I'm going to start with you, Claudia. And again, everyone, I will be reading these questions that you send me directly or put in Q&A and try to address as many as possible. I'm going to start with Claudia. And Claudia, can you just, one of the questions we get is like, how can mediation help me? And in particular, like if we're really not getting along, is mediation an option for us?
Okay. So the thing about mediation is it's private and confidential. So I want you to imagine that you go to the courthouse and you bring your dirty laundry and you air it all up there. That's kind of, sometimes that happens. Whereas mediation is the opposite of that. It's private, it's confidential. There aren't people walking into the courthouse who can hear everything that's happening. So that's what I really, really like about it. Your business stays your business. And that is very, very important. What was the other question you asked me, Aaron? It just left my mind. Sorry, Aaron.
Rookie mistake. I was muted. Whether or not, like, it's still an option if you have like conflict.
Okay. If you didn't have any conflict, you wouldn't need the mediator at all. So the most important thing is that you guys are choosing to work together to solve this divorce, to get things solved as amicably as possible. So that also leaves the option that things aren't always going to be amicable. That's okay. The mediators totally expect that. We are trained in how to deal with conflict. So as long as the both of you come and you negotiate, you make a good faith effort to negotiate and to be honest, it's okay. And a lot of times that conflict, it boils down, it simmers out. It goes away, it lessens. So the more you talk, things actually become easier. So mediation can help you because it also can give you a different perspective on why is my spouse so difficult? One of the things that you will discover in mediation is most likely you understand their underlying reasons of why they're quote unquote difficult and what they really want. And I love when that happens because it's like these little light bulb moments and people are like, oh, that's what you want and that's why you want it. Oh, okay, we can work with this now. It stops becoming so personal. And even if you have children who are grown, so we might not be negotiating a parenting plan. Hopefully one day there'll be a wedding that you'll need to attend to and there's going to be babies that are born. So you still want to have some sort of good relationship with your ex. And that's one of the ways that's a great benefit of mediation.
I absolutely agree. And one of the big reasons why I wanted to get out of practicing law day in and day out, because lawyers are trained to win. And sometimes they win, but there's a lot of factors at play, including how the judge feels that particular day or what biases they may have towards your clients. And what lawyers are not trained to do, and where they don't unfortunately receive a lot of value for, is to understand your goals and needs, and most of the time like help you to come to a resolution. So
can I add one more thing to that, Erin?
Absolutely. Yep.
One of the things about family mediation that's unique is that it doesn't all happen in one day. It's not like you just show up to court and that's your day in court, or it's a corporate mediation where you're going to be there 12 hours. We schedule like an hour and then we're done for that day. And so you have these bite-sized bits of time where you can digest the information. And that is huge for family mediation, because you're not just dividing money, you're dividing lives, and you need time to process that information.
Awesome. Super helpful. Okay, Shelly, I'm going to throw a couple procedural questions at you that we've received. And again, guys, this is general. It's generally applies, but there are, some small exceptions and nuances. But in general, who pays for divorce expenses like form filing? Is it the person who wants the divorce?
It's generally the person who initiates the divorce filing. Yes.
Okay. And how much are filing fees? Like, what do you have to pay the court if they're not going through us, if they're just doing it on their own? What would they pay?
It depends which state and which county you're filing in. It varies across the nation, but like in California, it's $435. In New York, it's $220.
Okay. So usually, and in Colorado, if you file jointly, do you pay one or two filing fees?
You pay one filing fee.
Okay. What about if you're in California and you have a really short-term marriage, no kids, you just want out, do you still have to wait that 6 months?
Yeah, there is no process currently in California where you can get a divorce that you don't have to wait the 6 months. There is a process called summary dissolution in California where you file jointly. If you have no children, nobody's getting any spousal support, nobody has any significant assets and debts, you pay one filing fee. It's super simple, but you do still have to wait that 6 months.
Okay. This question just came up. Either one of you can answer. Is it, and I know that there's some ones above, which we'll get to. Is it possible to file using a lawyer and then like at some point move into mediation?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think if you think you might move into mediation, it'd be a really good idea to interview your attorney, the interview attorneys that you're considering to hire to make sure that they're mediation friendly, because if they're not, sometimes they can subvert that effort. But absolutely, you can start with a lawyer and move into mediation 100%.
So what does mediation friendly mean?
That they believe that the mediation can actually solve the problem, that they have a vested interest in you. Like, yes, I want these people to settle their divorce. I'm not just, and I don't, there is a time and place for lawyers. I used a lawyer for my own divorce because it was necessary. But sometimes, you want to make sure you don't have a lawyer who is trying to subvert mediation just so that they can get those hourly fees. And I hate to say it that way. I'm not.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think a lot of people fear that, not having a lawyer means they might make a decision that isn't in their best interest. And for that, I just want to remind you that at any point in time, you can consult with a lawyer, even for like 30 minutes to get a gut check. Am I on the right track here? And this is your divorce. So if you are started with lawyers and you might even need a lawyer for one small piece of the divorce, but if the rest of it you can resolve on your own or through mediation, that's going to save you a lot of money and maybe even get some goodwill between the two of you. There's another question. Do the filing fees justify what you get in return? I'm in California and surprised to hear New York is cheaper to divorce. No. The filing fees don't justify what you get in return. It is shocking that New York is cheaper, but I will tell you that there's pros and cons in every state. In New York, it's very litigious. So in California, most people are now thinking, hey, is mediation an option or are there other options? Whereas in New York, the like standard is like, I got to hire a lawyer. And it still isn't very clear to people that there are other options. So like, that's just like a little tidbit, but unfortunately, no, there are fee waivers in most states, although they're really hard to qualify for, but you can apply. It is just strictly based on household income. And sometimes like your needs or expenses. Okay. I am seeing a question that is directed towards me about date of separation. So if you could just message me, that person, and let me know what state you're in, that would be really helpful. Okay. Who is responsible for our debts? Claudia, Shelley?
The both of you.
Oops.
They're your debts, but this is a lot of times that comes up in mediation, and so that's one of the things we discuss of who's taking on what debt. And it's important to put that in the final judgment, the settlement pack agreement of who's responsible for what debt. That's one of the things that we get from your financials disclosure, so we can make your settlement as clear as possible. It's always a good idea if your name is on a credit card and your spouse has agreed to pay the credit card, that it gets paid off quickly, or that you have a clause in there somewhere. Well, Aaron's the lawyer. I like to put clauses in there that say something like, if this is not paid off by XYZ time, we'll come back to mediation to discuss it. Because if it's a credit card, and your name is on it, the credit card company can still come after you. So you want to make sure that those debts are completely cleared up. But because it was incurred during marriage, most likely they're shared debts.
That's a really good tip about having the clause and being really specific. I always say, the more detailed your agreement is, the better for managing expectations. And if you need to enforce, if somebody doesn't do something they're supposed to do, it's much easier to enforce if you have a clear agreement. Some people will say to me, hey, especially at Hello Divorce, because we have a good number of people that are working pretty well together, and they'll say to me, we're really flexible with parenting. I don't think we need to write our plan in there. And you don't, but life gets more complicated once you go from one household to two, and there might be new spouses, partners along the way, friends, your kids get older, they get more challenging, they get less challenging. So I always like to have this default agreement on, and I saw somebody had a question about, do we have a template, which I'll get to in a minute. This default agreement that if we can't agree, then we're going to then fall back on this agreement that we have in our divorce decree or divorce judgment, also sometimes called marital settlement agreement. As far as a template, a couple things here. One is we do have a co-parenting plan worksheet. And so I absolutely, Katie will link it in here for you all to see and use. If there's something that you feel is missing, please let us know. We're always updating it and trying to make it even better. The other thing is that we have another download on the site about terms you might want to add in light of COVID. Hopefully we're past the worst part and we're moving away from it and won't ever have to deal with it again. But what we learned is that, that crises do come up, and they're not, and illnesses and things like that. And so we really thought through what types of agreements people might want to put in their judgments in light of this changing new normal. Another question is that California family law indicates student loans are the responsibility of the student. I partly disagree, since I helped pay off all my ex's loans and now I'm stuck with $17,000 that he's not responsible for. I helped pay for $10,000 of his. Okay, so there is, and as part of that also, there was a question of whether or not to disclose student loan debt if it's only my debt and won't ask my spouse to pay. So answer to the second one's an easier one for me to answer, which is that yes, you have to disclose it. Sometimes, depending on your state, you can write in that disclosure state that you will take on this debt or that it should be assigned to you. Or when you give your financial disclosures to your spouse, you can annotate or you can give some feedback hey, my understanding is that I have to provide all this financial stuff, but it doesn't necessarily mean I want to stick you with it. So there's that. As for the second question, yeah, I mean, generally in California, student loans are assigned to the spouse who incurred it. However, there are exceptions. First of all, well, regardless of what the law says, it's whatever the two of you think is fair. So if you can come to an agreement that's different, that's great. But here are some of the exceptions that apply in some states, but definitely California. If the student loans were used to pay only household expenses as opposed to books and tuition, then it might still be reasonable or legal to share that debt. If you've been married a really long time, 10 years or more, and you used that debt to become, or your spouse did, get a higher paying position, so it benefited both of you, then sometimes we can talk about sharing that student loan, debt. So there are exceptions. And if you're interested in those legal exceptions, then definitely meet with a lawyer. If you're interested, or you can Google, or you can find it on Hello Divorce. I would just be cautious when you Google that it's a reputable site. Some good ones other than Hello Divorce are Avo, Nolo. Sometimes you can find some really good information there. All right. Shelly gets this question a lot. Why are divorces, why does it take so long? So can you maybe break down a little bit about if you want, what happens? Why is it that it doesn't happen overnight, and what maybe you can do to sort of speed up the process?
So first of all, in California, it takes a long time. I mean, it doesn't take as long in other states. The timing varies across the nation, obviously, with everything else. But it really depends on, it comes down to, a lot of it comes down to how short-staffed courthouses are, how busy judges are, because at the end of the day, your divorce judgment is being signed off on by a judge with a calendar, with hearings, with other judgments to review. So that plays a big part in it. Also, courthouses are really short-staffed. They don't, especially now, as we move towards post-COVID, there's not as many people working there at all. They are running low on people to actually review judgments. They aren't as clear sometimes in what it is they need in order to process your judgment, which causes some delay and frustration. And in California, there is a 6-month period before you can even be divorced. You have to wait a minimum of 6 months. And other states have that also, and they vary just like everything else.
Can you submit the paperwork before the 6 months? Do you have to wait?
Yes. Nope. You can submit the paperwork for the 6 months. What'll happen is one of two things. Either the court will hold your paperwork until that 6 month and 1 day time is up. They'll stamp it and send it on its way, or they will grant an effective date that's in the future. Right as your 6 months and 1 day has ended, they will grant your effective date on your judgment with that date and send your paperwork back to you immediately.
Great. And something, if anyone's feeling overwhelmed by these submission guidelines, just know that if you're working with a lawyer, or you use Hello Divorce and have a DIY Pro membership or above, we will handle the submission piece for you. And then also a word of caution that if you use a different DIY site, that the submission guidelines are tricky. And if you do end up needing some help, or it's getting delayed, you're welcome to schedule a 15-minute call with us so that we can see what we can do to help it along, to move it along as quickly as reasonably possible. I'm going to go back to that question. It was a California question. What date is used for asset division? Date of separation or filing or divorce? So generally in California, now, are you tired of hearing me say generally yet? Let me just tell you why I say that. So when you go to most lawyers' blogs or resources, they often tell you what the exception is. Like this could happen, or that could happen, or this could happen. And aside from causing anxiety, it makes you feel like you immediately need to have a lawyer handle your divorce start to finish. And in my experience of practicing law 16 years, also being a certified divorce financial, no, what am I? I'm a certified family law specialist. Most people fall into the general. So I don't generally talk about all the nuances unless you pay for some time with a lawyer and that's what you want. But date of separation for asset division. Usually we look at, in California, the actual date of separation as opposed to the date you filed the divorce. So date of separation is a little bit of a complicated term. We do have resources on our site that explain what date of separation is. But in general, it is the date where you or your spouse said to the other, I want a divorce. And then you continue to act towards that end. Meaning sometimes we get in big fights, we say, I want a divorce. And the next day we're like, hey, that was terrible. Let's go to therapy. But if, one of you has said, I want a divorce, and then you continue to make efforts to, move in that direction, then that would be the date of separation. The other thing I want to mention there is that there's a lot of conflicting law on the internet, and that's because date of separation has changed. The law changes quite a bit. At one point, a couple of years ago, for you to be separated, you actually had to move out of the house. That is not the case anymore. So if you see that, ignore it. You no longer have to move out. In fact, most of our California peeps can't afford to move out, at least right initially. So it just wasn't a fair question. Also, as I'm bringing these up and trying to get to as many as possible, Shelly, Claudia, if there's anything you feel like, oh, I get this question all the time and I want to bring it up, please jump in at any point. Let's see, how do I get to meet my mediator before I pay them? Who wants to tackle that?
Yes, you should. Now, not all, there are a few of us who work with Hello Divorce that we have a calendar set up so that, yes, you can come and, interview a couple of the mediators, but it is a good idea to meet the mediators that I think I'm a little flustered, a little nervous. Okay.
Oh, that's okay. No. I always lose my train of thought on this one too. So with Hello Divorce, if you want to work with a mediator like Claudia, can they speak with you first before paying?
And I think you should, because you need to make sure that my personality and your spouse's personality, we can work together. We're a good fit. And if we're not, it's not personal. It's totally okay. There's somebody else out there for you. And that's Hello Divorce has several mediators. So you have to feel safe with that person. And so if you have that opportunity to interview them, you should take that opportunity.
Absolutely. And you can read, maybe Katie can drop the link. I know we're sending a lot of links here, but drop the link in chat with some of the bios of some of our mediators. Because some people feel more comfortable with a lawyer mediator. They want to know exactly what the law says. And others, I would say probably most, would prefer to just work on something that feels fair and that, is guided generally by the law, but not necessarily exactly as the law says. So take a look at that. There's a question, what kind of questions to should you ask a mediator? I'm assuming this is in terms of the types of questions when you're trying to decide whether or not it's a great fit. So Claudia, either either think of what types of questions, or maybe like what questions have people asked you when in these initial meetings?
Well, I'm based in LA. So one of the questions I get a lot is, do you work with people in the industry, meaning the film industry? Are you used to the fact that the income fluctuates? Yes. Like, so those are questions, because I'm specifically based in LA. It's kind of a area focused question. It's an interesting question. But also, you want to ask them like, so if things get out of hand, are you comfortable reigning control? I mean, how do you feel about profanity in mediation? I know that's kind of a weird thing, but here's the thing about divorce, it's emotional. And one of the things I like to tell people is, I don't mind your cursing. I'd rather go into a session with you and you let your curse words out than you curse directly at your spouse. Um, Also, you kind of you want to ask them about their background, how long they've been doing it, where they got trained, not because those are necessarily super important, because you want to get a sense that, do they understand your situation? Have they worked with people like you before? Do you feel like they have empathy towards you, towards your situation? Because it's you like I said earlier, you want to feel safe. So if you can begin to ask those questions, like how do people usually do their parenting plans, or things like that. Your mediator should ask you, what's keeping you up at night. So if they don't ask you that, you tell them, hey, this is what's keeping me up at night. Do you have any suggestions? Or have people come to you with those types of things? And then that will give you a really good idea of how they deal with situations, what they're thinking about.
Yeah. Okay. There's a good question here too. So once I tell my spouse I want a divorce, will my words alone protect me from possibly having spouse move or hide funds? Is that the start of the restraining order? Okay. So nothing can fully protect any of us, right? Like we can't control the actions of our spouse. I think there's a saying that you don't really know your spouse until you file for divorce, right? Like then, which is true. We sometimes see these sides of our spouse that we have never seen before. However, we also know our spouse better than anyone in the world. And so oftentimes you can really trust your instincts, whether or not you think they're going to play fair. And if you think that they really are going to hide assets or keep things from you, maybe because of the way they dealt with you, your kids, or maybe how they handled business negotiations, I don't know, then that's a really good time to talk to a lawyer, right? Especially if there's significant assets. If we're talking about, some stuff that you don't really care about, like no big deal. Now, all of that being said, the law does say, like when you file for divorce, these documents come with your divorce petition in almost every state that say like, hey guys, you're not allowed to transfer property like without like your spouse agreeing. You're not allowed to hide assets. And those are I think the restraining orders that
cancel insurance, cancel
insurance. Yeah. And if they do, and you can prove it, like, and you have to go to court, then like you're in good shape, especially around insurance. Courts do not want to see you cancel insurance. But like despite that language, like, we've seen everything. So I can't guarantee that it would actually do anything major. Although the forms themselves, when they say things like, you are being served with a lawsuit, this is legal, you have X days to respond, are oftentimes like really motivating for people to like get in line and start acting a little bit more appropriately. Okay. I saw a question somewhere here about a request for orders for attorney's fees. So that would be California, although in virtually every state, there is a method by which you can request fees. it would be great if you and your spouse can come to an agreement on it, or if you don't use lawyers at all, you don't have to worry about that. But in most states, if you can't come to an agreement, you would have to file what's called a motion or request for order and seek the help of the judge to order your spouse to pay your fees, or at least some of your fees. And sometimes the laws in your state are around need. In fact, most states, it's like, well, if one spouse makes more money and has more assets or access to cash or credit, then they're going to need to pay some of the other spouse's fees. And then in other cases, it is about they're awarded as sanctions, meaning if one spouse is acting really bad, and I mean really bad, because the courts don't like to punish. They try to avoid that. So to get sanctions, your spouse has to do something like pretty gnarly in the eyes of the law, like liquidate your kid's college savings account during the divorce and spend it on a Porsche, or like something kind of crazy like that. So usually it's about need-based stuff. Does it make sense financially to prepare for meeting with a lawyer by filling out the forms first? And can you, like, before you meet with a lawyer, I was paraphrasing and I should have just read it, but before you meet with a lawyer, can you like do your financial disclosures, and then can you like proceed by yourself, or can you proceed with the lawyer? Like what's the rules around that, Shelley?
Before you meet with a lawyer, it's always a good idea to have as much information done as you can. That way they have a full picture and can advise you on anything that you need advising on. What was the second part of that question, Erin?
So part of it is like, how do I know when the lawyer's starting to bill me? And so let's start there.
Okay. The lawyer is going to, in a law firm, the lawyer is going to bill you as soon as they start touching any part of your case, whether they're reviewing documents, answering emails, having a phone call, preparing for court, reviewing your financial disclosures. All of that is billable time.
So every like minute is pretty much anytime they're working on it.
Okay.
And then like, do any of your DIY pros, so these are the people that are using our software to do their forms and then using your team to file the documents, do any of them like work with the lawyer as well? And how does that work?
Yes. So we have people that both have a lawyer and use our divorce navigator, use our services to do their forms, because it cuts down on your attorney costs. So we're doing the paperwork, handling all that stuff, filing it for you, and then your attorney is there to advise you. On the same issue, we have legal coaches that do the same thing for you. So you could use our services through DIY Pro to do those things and still consult with an attorney on the side about either the documents or your situation, or specific questions that you have about your situation and moving forward in your agreements.
I wanted to add something. Shelley and her team are pros. They are so good at what they do. They've been doing it for a long, long, long time. So if you have any doubts right now, don't doubt that team, because they're really, really good, and they're nice and they're thorough.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. You make it easy to work with. We make things easier for everyone.
That. I mean, that's our goal, right? Is to make it as easy for everybody as possible.
Yeah, because this is stressful. But I mean, but on my end as a mediator, see, because here's the thing, I don't mediate until I get your financial disclosures. Yep. And so the question of when should I do this, the sooner you do it, the faster things can kind of move along, at least on our end. But the communication I get from her team is so thorough and so complete. It just makes everyone's life better. Okay, it's a
I
shame.
love that.
But
No, I'm really
Yeah,
glad that you
thank
shared
you.
that, because it's something that I'm most proud of too when it comes to our team, is like the convenience of having everything in one place. And someone always, like, somebody is assigned to your case that you always know you can reach out to. You have a whole team backing you, and you know that, like, we are doing everything we can um, to improve what we provide every single day. So I think that's really helpful. We're like running out of time, and so I want to like hit a few more questions. I have a startup company in early stages, currently raising seed funding. How can I negotiate to keep all the shares of this company? So a couple things, you might want to consider coming to an agreement on just like your company and maybe a couple other things now. If your divorce hasn't been finalized or filed, or you aren't ready to come to an agreement on everything else, because there's enough stress associated with fundraising that you probably like don't want to also think about what will happen. Now, like, how can you negotiate to keep all the shares of your company? Well, one is to ask your spouse. The other is to look at the current valuation of the company before the seed round and consider at that point buying your spouse out, coming to an agreement where maybe your spouse gets all of their retirement or part of their retirement account in exchange for the company. You can negotiate any way you want, anything that feels fair to the both of you. It might be a good opportunity to meet with the mediator, but if the divorce hasn't been filed, then I would strongly recommend entering into what we call a post-nuptial agreement, which at least like resolves certain assets that feel really stressful to the two of you. My wife has filed for separation. Can I use your platform to respond to the divorce? How do I do that? Absolutely. We have spouse plans. If Katie, you could link to the like DIY Pro spouse plan, that would be great. You can also, I encourage everyone to take us up on this, schedule a 15-minute call. It's not legal advice. Can't give you legal advice on that call. I wish we could, but regulations don't allow us to, but we can at least like hear your situation and help you figure out which plan might be best for you. So two things there, Katie, the spouse option plan, and the second is what was the second? She probably got it.
Call, the 15
yes,
call.
the 15-minute call. Okay. If your spouse cheated on you, does that affect or help divorce fees paid by that spouse, or at least half? Not usually. I'm sorry, because that's awful and you're not alone. We have a lot of people who are in that situation. Not usually. Usually the courts don't award fees because of that. However, like, judges don't tend to like cheaters, and there might be some other way to be able to negotiate money from your spouse. So like, as an example, maybe you take a look at the credit card statement and you see that there were a lot of dinners that look like they were for two, but you weren't there. Maybe helping to get leverage in negotiations by looking a little deeper and getting a little creative to see where you might be able to recover some additional funds. Claudia, Shelley, anything else that either one of you want to share? And it looks to me like we might need to have a round two, one more webinar part 2 to answer the rest of these, but anything?
I wanted to share that you don't have to have a mediator do your entire divorce. Mm-hmm. If you've got things settled for the most part, but you just can't agree on 1 or 2 issues, come to mediation for that. You can totally do that. So consider that.
Great. Yeah. Anything for you, Shell?
No, I think that about, you hit the nail on the head there for all that.
Great. Okay. On our site or on the screen now, you'll see our different plans. Anyone can add an hour or 2 or 3 of mediation financial planning or legal help to any of these plans. So know that. DIY Pro, that is our most popular plan. Divorce Plus, the big difference between Pro and Plus is if the two of you are planning to both participate in the divorce, and usually from the start. And then Cooperative Divorce is the plan that includes mediation all the way through. And I will tell you, as you already know, that to the extent that you can avoid court, you can avoid expensive legal fees, whether you use Hello Divorce or not, that is going to be to your benefit. And I'm just really grateful for you all being here. Thank you so much for sticking around. And we will ensure that we send you this recording. We send you all the links and the slides that we shared today. And then, yeah, if there's any questions we didn't answer, feel free to reach out on our chat bot, or understand that you'll probably receive another message soon with our next webinar. So thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Shelly. This was awesome. And really thanks everyone for being here. Oh, the promo code. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. If you're still here, and we still have about 21 people, 22 people here. If you're still here, promo code APR100, that will get you $100 off a Hello Divorce plan. Not our DIY plan, because that's $100 altogether, but anything Pro or above. So there's the promo code. I'll leave it up on the screen for just another minute. But again, thank you everyone for attending, and have a great rest of your day.